Hi and welcome to the NBA show. My name is Morten Jensen and today we have another edition of the Monday News Dump. We'll talk about the play-in tournament and the Hall of Fame, so stay tuned. So let's start off with the play-in tournament. It's a bit of a weird one, so let's get some graphics up from NBA.com to walk us all through it. So as you can see, the 7th and 8th playoff seed simply has not been determined yet. That's why we have the play-in tournament. Let's take a look at the Western Conference, where the Lakers and the Golden State Warriors are going to be playing each other on Wednesday. I've seen a lot of people on Twitter go, well, what if the Golden State Warriors win? Then LeBron James won't be in the playoffs, and that's really not how it works. They still have a chance of making it into the playoffs. The winner of that game will take the 7th seed, which means that the 8th seed is still up for grabs. A game above the Lakers and the Golden State Warriors, Memphis against the Spurs, the winner of that will play against the loser of Los Angeles and Golden State, and the winner of that game will take the 8th seed. So it's not really that difficult. It just needs some visual representation, I think, but it is one of these implementations that just seems to make a lot of sense for an excitement perspective. It's going to add some additional intrigue going into the NBA playoffs. Now, here's the thing. You're looking at that and you're going, well, the Lakers, the Celtics, could we even have a playoffs without them? Theoretically, yes, but it's also like this. The odds aren't really great of them missing out because they are better teams. They are someone who can just pick it up over a small play-in tournament process, which is 1 to 2 games, and then they'll just stay and stick. We'll see what happens, but ultimately speaking, I think it's so crucial that we look at this with an open mind when we come into the play-in tournament, just realizing that this is something that the league has created to try to amp up some excitement. You have to remember, year in and year out, fans were essentially complaining about the end of the regular season. Everyone was saying, well, no team is really taking it seriously. They're either fighting for playoff position or they're tanking, yada, yada, yada. The process of reaching this sort of format is trying to keep teams more competitive to the very end of the season, and that has actually happened. So I think it's time we give the NBA some credit here. They decided we have a problem. We need to identify what we can do to prevent that from being a continuous problem, and they succeeded. They found a way to keep these teams invested, interested. Like, it seemed like the Washington Wizards, currently in the play-in tournament, like they were dead in the water. They could easily have decided, you know what? Let's just not. Let's tank and let's see what we can get in the lottery instead. They didn't. They had Russell Westbrook, they had Bradley Beal. They decided, you know what? No, let's go for it. Let's see what can happen. And now they're just one game away from being a fully fledged playoff team. Look, it's working. I don't care. It works. I know people will say this isn't the right format. Fine. You can argue that you can tinker with it, that you can make some modifications, but the raw idea of this, it's working. And I commend the NBA from actually trying this. It takes balls to implement these type of changes to a league that's so heavily involved in culture and history. I think thinking outside the box, as the league has done here, is very, very interesting, and kudos to the NBA for actually having the balls to implement it. I think that's great. Let's switch gears and go to the 2020 Hall of Fame, which happened on Saturday. And I realize it's 2021, but because of COVID and all that, things got moved around. So, of course, the 3 major players making it were Tim Duncan, Kevin Garnett, and Kobe Bryant. That goes without saying. I watched those 3 speeches. Tim and Kevin obviously represented themselves. You had Vanessa Bryant, who came onto the stage and spoke on behalf of the late Kobe Bryant. And I just kind of want to walk through each and every one of those 3, because Tim, I think, this was one of those moments where you really saw him do something that he's not a natural at, which is public speaking. He's very private. He's one who really wants to stay away from the spotlight. That's been one of his MOs ever since he joined the NBA. That was like the media section after games or before games. Those were not something that he enjoyed doing. So standing on a stage with literally millions of eyes on him from around the globe, that has to feel bad. That has to feel like something you don't want to do if you are a bit of an introvert. But Tim provided one of those speeches where you just go, wow, that's impressive, because he dug down. He spoke about his parents. He spoke about his life. He spoke about college, pop, his teammates, and you could sense every step of the way he was very, very close to just tearing up. He's a way more emotional guy than people give him credit for. Also, side note about Tim, many people don't know this, but during the course of his NBA career, he was known as one of the funniest guys in the NBA locker rooms all around the league. I mean, I've spoken to a couple of NBA players about this, and every time when I've asked them about this specifically, I've gotten back, yeah, Tim is a hell of a fun guy. It's something that the media never really seemed to latch on to. So I think that's super funny. And I kind of expected him to make a couple jokes on the way, and he did, but they were very, very subtle. But I think for him, it was just such a big moment that he had to take it serious. But I gotta admit, I shed a little tear on his behalf, because to me, I think Tim is one of the greatest all-time players when it comes to not just big men, but overall. I know a lot of people called him boring, and what the hell is wrong with you if you call him boring? He was fundamentally sound, but he was tremendous to watch. I mean, it's not just the defensive rotations, which, yeah, I guess you can call boring if you're not into that type of basketball, but he was just brilliant. I mean, he thought the game out to an extent that Magic Johnson and Larry Bird did, and I don't think he ever quite got the same recognition of that, because he was a big. You have this tendency to pigeonhole big men into them being non-thinkers, guys who don't really read the floor. It's almost like, yeah, you can only read the floor if you're a playmaker, and that's just not right. That's a very wrong way of analyzing big men. And I think Tim, for all intents and purposes, might go down as the most high IQ big of all time. That's at least from where I'm sitting. I believe he's in that category. So yeah, kudos to Tim for making the Hall. Well deserved. An obvious first ballot guy, of course. I really enjoyed hearing what he had to say. Let's move on to KG. And you know what? I'm a little bit surprised. His speech lasted around 7 or 8 minutes. I thought this was a guy who was going to go long, like 20 plus minutes, and just throw in 50 swear words. And to his credit, he tried every damn way to not swear. This is a guy, remember, that NBA broadcast decided we're going to be muting the microphones behind the basket if we can see he is in the near vicinity, because he is swearing all the time. He will drop F-bombs on you all game long. So telecasts literally had to mute their mics whenever Garnett was close to the basket. This is the type of guy we're talking about, and you could just sense he had to stop himself very, very frequently in order not to swear, because he knew the stage that he was on. I found that hilarious. I think that was just ultimate KG. Honestly, I wouldn't even have minded if he had dropped like 25 F-bombs during that speech, because that would have been him. And I think Garnett, to his credit, was always one of those guys who kept being honest, just with himself and everyone around him. There was just no BS when it came to KG. If you asked him a question, you got a straight answer. If you talked to him about something, you would always get it, like the truth being handled to you. If you were a player who didn't really deliver on the court, he would tell you. I mean, every one of his teammates, you could always hear when they talked about him in interviews as well, it was always, no, KG kept it 100. He always kept it 100. And I think that is just one of those prime examples of being a teammate who does the right thing. Like, the right thing isn't always just to go up to a young guy or any guy really who's struggling and go, well, no, you're fine. No, he was like, no, you're struggling. I can help you out of that, but right now you're playing like insert swear word. So I think for him to have that very bombastic personality, I think that actually helped a lot of his teammates on the way, and it certainly was something that just fit like a glove when he made it to the Boston Celtics and played with Paul Pierce and Rajon Rondo and Ray Allen, those guys. So Kevin Garnett, to me, one of my all-time favorite players, just in terms of entertainment perspective, but also defense, passing, playmaking. I mean, this class, man, it's outstanding. And KG making it and him trying to fight back the way that he speaks, that was classic. Finally, of the three, of course, we just have to take a moment here to appreciate the strength of Vanessa Bryant. I can't imagine what that have felt like going up on that stage, knowing full well that everyone is basically watching your pain. I don't know what that feels like. I can only imagine, and that must have been one of the toughest things that she's ever had to gone through from like a public event perspective. The person who followed her up on stage was, of course, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant's idol, and Mike could barely keep himself together during Vanessa's speech, and it was so heartfelt. This was clearly a woman in mourning, a wife in mourning, a mother in mourning, who misses her husband and her daughter so very dearly, and I can't fathom the strength that she had to muster up to stand up there on that stage and deliver a speech in the capacity that she did. I'm still overwhelmed, and much like any one of you, I of course also got super emotional. I think that just takes so much courage. It really does. I mean, that pain is still fresh and will be fresh for a long time, unfortunately. To basically say, you know what, screw everyone else. I'm going to do this my way for my husband's sake, for my daughter's sake, and I'm going to do it their way and what they wanted to hear. Wow, I was blown away. I mean, it's what she has gone through over the past plus year has been mind-blowingly difficult, I can imagine. So kudos to Vanessa for going up there and just being fantastic. Clearly, that was the highlight of the entire evening. I'm blown away, and I can't say enough major things about Vanessa's way of just handling this. It blows my mind. Next up is the 2021 NBA Hall of Fame class, which will consist of Paul Pierce, Chris Bosh, Chris Webber, and Ben Wallace. So let's go through these guys one by one. Obviously, Pierce won a championship in Boston next to Garnett, Rajon Rondo, Ray Allen back in 2008. He was a guy who for a long time was involved in trade rumors, and he was never really traded away until he was past his prime. But he was consistently at every trade deadline, every offseason, it was, are the Celtics going to trade away Paul Pierce? And it was a weird situation because it almost seemed like the tide was turning to the point where they were rebuilding within the same structure that he was on the roster. Like they had Sebastian Telfair, Al Jefferson, all those guys, and it just seemed obvious that they were going through a youth movement. But they pivoted in a different direction. They decided to use all the young assets to build something around Paul Pierce. A lot of teams would have gone the opposite direction. Instead, Danny Ainge and the Boston Celtics decided, you know what? We have a chance here. We can get Ray Allen. We can get Kevin Garnett. And there you go. You had suddenly three of the most dangerous players at their positions at that point in time come together, and it led to a year one championship. For Pierce to stick it through that whole endeavor and not officially want out or demand out or do what James Harden did this year, for example, I think that counts for something. He was very, very loyal to the Celtics, and he wanted to win with the Celtics. He had a level of fight in him that I thought was very, very admirable. And also, let's just talk about the fact that he was never really that athletic of a guy. And back in those days when he came into the league, you know, he came in 1998, and during his prime, those was in the early 2000s, he was going up against a league that was very athletic. It wasn't really a good league. It was probably on par with the league of the 1970s, meaning it was a very bad product at that point in time. But he came in and thought the game out. And I think everyone who loves the game of basketball, not just highlights, but the game of basketball, they will appreciate the way that he attacked matchups. It wasn't by overpowering you to the rim or skying over you or whatever. It was about finding the right angle and like using one or two power dribbles, back your way in, make a little shake move. Like he had a lot of moves in his bag, which we don't give him credit for, honestly. And then just finish from like the mid-range area or getting to the foul line or get yourself a layup. He just found a way. And I think that's part of why we're comparing Luka Doncic to Paul Pierce now, because it's the same caliber of player when it comes to not being overly athletic, at least from a vertical perspective. He was just smart, great footwork, thought the game out. He's a clear first ballot Hall of Famer when you think about it. Just one of the great wings ever for the Boston Celtics from the league, honestly. Now, Chris Bosh, I feel so bad for Bosh because he had to end his career prematurely because of a blood clot, so he never really got a chance to go out on his own terms. That said, he did get a chance to win 2 rings in Miami next to LeBron and D Wade, so he's not coming out of the NBA empty-handed. But I do feel bad that he didn't get a chance to just basically say, I'm going to ride in the sunset on my own terms. I think that's just one of those things that you have to embrace, unfortunately, because of your medical situation. But let's talk about him as a player. Not only was he a floor stretcher and someone who could shoot, he was a very aggressive guy when it came to the rebounding area, and he developed into one of the premier, big defenders, but also someone who could slide down and guard multiple positions. At the time that he played, positions were pretty locked in. It wasn't as fluid as what's now, but you still saw a little bit of switching, and he could play both center and power forward from in terms of who he could defend. But there were occasions when he would slide down and guard the players like Paul Pierce, guys who were playing the 3, and he would do so at a fairly consistent level. We didn't see a whole lot of that at that point, but he could do that, and that defensive versatility really unlocked a lot for the Miami Heat during their glory days. I think that is something that we seem to be forgetting. Most people who look up his stats are going, well, he was an offensive-minded 4 who could shoot a little bit from mid-range and 3-point territory. He was more than that. And also, what he did in Toronto was absolutely huge. He brought that team back to relevance. He was a guy who put up tremendous numbers any given night, and he sacrificed when he joined the Heat. This was a guy who was coming off a year averaging over 24 points per game. I mean, he settled into like this third-tier role, which is fine because it ultimately won Miami championships. But there's no doubt in my mind that if he had gotten every chance that he wanted to have, he could have scored 25, 26, 27 points per game if he wanted to. He was that talented of an offensive player. For him to sacrifice, and when you look at his overall career numbers, he sacrificed a great deal. It's astounding to me just how unselfish he was in that regard, because his career numbers do not do him justice. So do me a favor, if you ever find yourself in a situation where you have to discuss Chris Bosh or evaluate him, don't just go off of the raw numbers. He was much, much better. Chris Webber. So C-Web, of course, along with Jalen Rose and Juwan Howard, formed the Fab Five in Michigan. That's a great story in and of itself. I'm not even going to go into the timeout thing. He was just great. He changed college basketball for the better. It allowed for a lot more individualism, which I always support. I think he was such a big part of that whole mantra and change of mantra, really. So for him to come into the NBA and maintain a high level of play, that was crucial to me. Because one thing is, he could have been a great college player, but if he had not lived up to those expectations coming into the NBA, that entire process would have fallen a little bit flat. He came in, he was clearly one of the better forwards in the NBA. He had an MVP caliber campaign back in 2000, 2001 for the Sacramento Kings, averaging over 27 points per game. I mean, he did a lot in his NBA career, and yet a lot of people are saying, well, he could have done more. I kind of get where you're going with that, because he was just that physically imposing, and there were definitely times when he would settle for too many mid-range jump shots. But I disagree with the notion that he didn't put it all on the floor. I really do. Even if his decision-making at times were a little bit, let's just say, inconsistent. I will say this, he gave it his all every single game, especially in the playoffs. You could sense that if he had a matchup where he knew, I can take this guy into the post and I can just use all my wide variety of moves that I have down there to get a basket, or at least draw a double team and then kick it out to an open shooter, I'm going to do that. So he realized, I am going to use my body and my skill set to the best of my abilities in terms of the matchups that are on the floor. I always found a pattern of this, and I don't have the stats to back this up, so people can absolutely correct me if I'm wrong, but from the games that I watched with Webber growing up, I always felt that when he started taking those shots that he always got criticized for, which was, the mid-range jump shot, it felt like he had players on him, guarding him, that weren't significantly smaller than him. So he basically decided, instead of going in and just banging amongst the trees, he would take that little midi pull-up instead. And I see a lot of logic in that. I think Chris, to some extent, would have done a lot better in today's NBA than the era that he came into, because he really likes shooting the ball. In today's NBA, this would have been a guy that probably would have taken at least 500 triples a year, if not more. He seems like he would have been that kind of player. Now that would have been embraced. But for C-Webb, one thing we really have to talk about here, his hands. His hands were fantastic. He could grab and catch everything. I mean, I've seen some really funky passes over the course of his career get thrown his way, and he would just take that paw up there and he would go grab it. It didn't matter the angle, the direction of the pass, he would grab that thing. He just had full control of that ball because of his big hands, and he had a great sense with the ball in his hands as well, which made him a great passer. He was also a very good ball handler for someone his size. That really goes forgotten. So there's a lot here to look at Chris Webber and go, the talent was there. And he did have a very, let's say, close season in 2002 when he could have won the ring. Ultimately, he didn't. But yeah, we're going to be talking about career in this sense that he never won a ring. And because of that, his career might have been a failure. I don't agree with that notion. I think he gave it his all. Like, some people are just going to come up short. Like, Patrick Ewing never won a ring. Reggie Miller never won a ring. John Stockton never won a ring. It's fine. He's still one of those guys who gave it his all every single game. And he had a great level of talent. He had a great level of production. And he was also team-oriented. That Sacramento Kings team, he sacrificed despite averaging 27 points per game. He allowed someone like Vlade Divac to establish himself. He allowed a Doug Christie to come in and establish himself from like the mid-range and three-point area. He wanted that whole team to just mesh. Peja Stojakovic, his evolution wouldn't have been that great if it hadn't been for C-Webb trying to kind of move back a little bit and say, you know what, Peja, you're a tremendous asset to the team, so I'm going to give you that space. So from a personality perspective, I think Webber was exactly the player that he should have been at the right time. So kudos on him. Finally, of course, there's Ben Wallace. I don't really know what we can say about Ben outside of the fact that he was never supposed to happen. He's a 6'7", like a non-scorer, non-ball handler, a 6'7" center. And when he came in, he was not built as that. It was like, oh, you're 6'7", we're expecting you to handle the ball, create off the bounce, do some things. No, that was never his game, and for some reason, it just kind of worked. The Detroit Pistons, when they traded for him, he was acquired in the Grant Hill trade back in 2000. They realized, you know what, he's just not that type of guy. He's a big. We can use him as a big, and he ended up being one of their best centers, if not the best center in Detroit history when you really look at it. I mean, the Defensive Player of the Year awards, the fact that he could play on the perimeter defensively, the way that he would gobble up rebounds. I mean, again, the 6'7" guy grabbing 14, 15 rebounds per game. I mean, it is something that you can't really wrap your head around, just how imposing this guy was. This is a dude who would go up to Shaquille O'Neal, who at the time was probably around 350 pounds, and he would play him to a standstill. How is that humanly possible? Well, first and foremost, Ben was strong. He was super strong. He probably still is. He can definitely kick my ass, that's for sure. But outside of that, he was also smart about positioning, angles, where to place himself in terms of distance away from the basket. Like, he knew he had to push Shaq out of his comfort zone, and he knew if you could just have him stay a couple feet away from that comfort zone, that could change a whole lot of things. That would have a ripple effect on the entire Miami Heat offense. This was back when Shaq played in Miami, obviously, and it did. He was just such a smart defensive player. People talk about his athleticism and his shot blocking and his steals and all the numbers, and yes, absolutely, they were great. He was one of the most productive defensive-minded players ever, but he thought the game out. And can you sense a pattern when I say that? Because I've said that literally about every of these Hall of Fame guys so far. They thought the game out. They really did. And that just goes to show, once again, that the truly elite players of this game, both past and present, they think out the game. And that's where you find these high caliber basketball players. So if you're an NBA team and you're looking at drafting someone and you think, well, this guy doesn't really seem to have a whole lot of basketball IQ, he's more of an athlete than a basketball player, might be a good idea to stay away. Big Ben is the perfect example of that. You need to have someone who understands everything about defense, about where you position yourself, about how you communicate with teammates. He is the perfect example of someone who embodied that.